I watched my father's casket disappear into the ground, believing the worst pain of my life had already happened. Then my stepmother smiled. In front of every grieving relative, she raised her voice and said, "Stop pretending. You were never his real daughter." The whispers spread instantly. People I'd known my entire life stepped away from me as if I didn't belong there anymore. She proudly announced that I would inherit nothing because my father had supposedly hidden the truth for decades. I couldn't even speak. Then the family lawyer stood, held up a sealed envelope, and said, "Mrs. Carter, your husband knew this day was coming. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 29 years old. Until the day of my father's funeral, I believed grief had a limit. I thought losing the man who had raised me, protected me, and loved me through every stage of my life would be the deepest pain I could ever feel. I had no idea that before the flowers wilted on his grave, someone would try to erase my entire identity. My dad wasn't a wealthy celebrity or a famous politician. He was simply the kind of man everyone trusted. He owned a successful construction company built from nothing but hard work, honesty, and 25 years of 14-hour days. Around town, people respected him because his word meant something. To me, though, he wasn't the respected businessman everyone admired. He was simply Dad. My mother died when I was 9 years old after a long battle with cancer. Losing her nearly destroyed him, but he never allowed me to feel alone. Every school play, every birthday, every graduation, every heartbreak, he was always there. He somehow learned how to braid my hair before elementary school, burned more pancakes than I could count trying to make breakfast, and never missed telling me he loved me before bed. 5 years later, he married Diane. At first, I honestly wanted us to become a family. I was 14 and desperately hoped having another woman in the house would make life feel normal again. Diane smiled often around Dad, bought me birthday presents, and called me sweetheart whenever he was nearby. But the moment he left the room, everything changed. She criticized the way I dressed. She complained whenever Dad spent money on me. She rolled her eyes every time he talked proudly about my grades or my dreams. As I got older, her comments became colder. "You're lucky Robert is so generous. You should remember who really runs this house. I wouldn't get too comfortable if I were you." Dad never heard those conversations because Diane made sure he wasn't around. After college, I moved into my own apartment but visited Dad every weekend. Even after he became sick with heart problems, I drove across town almost every evening just to have dinner with him or help organize his medications. Diane always acted polite while I was there, yet somehow managed to make me feel like an unwanted guest inside the home where I'd grown up. When Dad passed away 6 months after his final surgery, my entire world stopped. The funeral drew hundreds of people. Employees, friends, neighbors, business partners, former clients. Everyone came to honor the man who had spent his entire life helping others. I stood beside his casket holding back tears as the minister finished speaking about kindness, loyalty, and family. Then Diane slowly walked forward. She cleared her throat loudly enough that every conversation stopped. "I suppose everyone deserves to know the truth," she announced. People turned toward her. She pointed directly at me. "Emily isn't Robert's real daughter." The cemetery became completely silent. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then whispers spread through the crowd. "What? Did you know? Is that true?" I couldn't breathe. Diane folded her arms confidently. "Robert finally accepted it before he died," she continued. "He knew she wasn't biologically his, and that's why she has no right to inherit anything. She isn't family." Several relatives stared at me with open disbelief. A few actually stepped away. It felt as though 20 years of memories had vanished in seconds. I wanted to scream that she was lying. Instead, I simply looked at my father's casket, because somehow defending myself beside the man who had raised me felt wrong. Without another word, everyone left for the attorney's office to begin the reading of Dad's will. Diane walked in first, wearing the satisfied smile of someone who believed she'd already won. The attorney waited until everyone was seated before calmly removing a sealed envelope from his briefcase. He looked directly at Diane, then at me. Finally, he spoke. Before we discuss Robert Carter's estate, he left very specific instructions for this exact moment. No one spoke. The attorney, Mr. Harrison, rested both hands on the polished conference table and waited until every whisper faded. The room had gone from tense to suffocating. Even Diane's confident smile seemed frozen in place. "This envelope," he said calmly, "was personally sealed by Robert Carter 6 months before his passing. He instructed me that it should only be opened if anyone questioned Emily's place in this family." My heartbeat echoed inside my ears. Diane gave a dismissive laugh.
"Perfect," she said.
"Then let's settle this once and for all." Mr. Harrison nodded without emotion. That is exactly Mr. Carter's intention. He carefully broke the wax seal and removed 3 items: a handwritten letter, a certified laboratory report, and a small flash drive. Several relatives leaned forward. Diane folded her arms confidently. "I assume the DNA report comes first," she said with a smug smile. "After all, facts don't lie." The attorney adjusted his glasses. "No, they don't." He opened the report and quietly read the first page before looking directly at the family. "This DNA analysis was conducted by an independent, accredited laboratory." The room became silent again. The probability that Robert Carter is Emily Carter's biological father is 99.9999%. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Then someone behind me whispered, "Oh my God." Another relative covered her mouth. An older uncle slowly turned toward Diane. She blinked several times. "That's impossible." Mr. Harrison calmly placed the report on the table. "The chain of custody is fully documented. Mr. Carter personally submitted his own DNA sample, authorized the testing, and received these certified results himself." Diane's confident expression cracked for the first time. "There must be some mistake," she insisted. "There isn't." She stood abruptly. "Robert never told me about any DNA test." The attorney looked directly at her. "He specifically instructed me not to tell you." The room exploded with confused murmurs. My cousin Sarah looked back and forth between Diane and the attorney. Why would Uncle Robert hide something like this? Mr. Harrison picked up the flash drive. Because he suspected this accusation would eventually be made. Diane's face strained of color. The attorney inserted the drive into his laptop. A moment later, Dad appeared on the large television mounted against the conference room wall. He looked thinner than I remembered, but smiled gently into the camera. "If you're watching this," he began, "then someone has questioned whether Emily is my daughter." His eyes filled with disappointment. I prayed this recording would never be necessary. No one interrupted. No one dared. Diane spent years telling me Emily couldn't possibly be mine. She repeated it so often that I finally agreed to settle the matter permanently, not because I doubted my daughter, but because I wanted undeniable proof after I was gone. My eyes immediately filled with tears. Dad looked directly into the camera. When the laboratory confirmed exactly what I already knew, I kept the results private.
He paused.
Not because I feared the truth. His voice became firmer. But because I wanted to know whether the people around me loved my family enough to stop spreading lies. Several relatives slowly lowered their heads. Dad continued. Diane never knew I discovered she had been asking relatives, friends, and even my accountant whether I planned to remove Emily from my will. A loud gasp swept across the room. My aunt stared at Diane in complete disbelief. "You actually did that?" Diane opened her mouth, but no words came out. Dad's recorded voice continued. "My greatest regret isn't becoming ill." He smiled sadly. "It's realizing someone I trusted was trying to convince me to abandon the child I've loved from the moment she was born." By now, tears were streaming down my face. The room had completely turned. The whispers were no longer about me. They were about Diane. Mr. Harrison quietly stopped the recording. He looked around the room before placing both hands on another sealed document resting beside the laptop. His voice remained steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Carter's final letter changes everything. And we're only just beginning." Mr. Harrison looked around the room one last time before carefully unfolding the final handwritten letter. "I was instructed to read every word exactly as written," he said quietly. No one objected. The room had become so silent that I could hear the ticking of the clock hanging above the bookshelf. Then my father's words filled the room. If this letter is being read, then the truth has already begun defending itself. My chest tightened. Emily, my little girl. I lowered my head. Dad had called me that since I was 5 years old. If you're hearing this, then I'm no longer here to protect you myself. That hurts me more than anything else. I wiped away another tear. People often say blood makes a family. I disagree. Love, loyalty, sacrifice, and honesty make a family. He paused before continuing. But in your case, Emily, God gave me both. You are my biological daughter, and you are the child who stood beside me every day of my life. Several relatives quietly began crying. When my health declined, many people visited less often. Emily visited more. She drove me to appointments, organized my medications, stayed through difficult nights, and never once asked me for money, property, or promises. She simply wanted more time with her father. I closed my eyes. Those evenings had never felt like obligations. They were gifts I would never have again. Dad's letter continued. Diane, if you're sitting in this room hearing these words, then you ignored every opportunity one gave you to choose kindness instead of manipulation. Across the table, Diane stared at the floor. She never looked up. I discovered long before my death that you repeatedly pressured me to remove Emily from my will. You questioned her birth, spread rumors among relatives, and attempted to isolate me from my own daughter. The room filled with quiet murmurs. No one defended her anymore. You underestimated something very important. I may have grown physically weaker, but my judgment never did. Mr. Harrison turned another page. Months before my passing, I met privately with my attorneys and completely updated my estate plan. Diane's head snapped upward. The attorney continued reading. My family home, my personal journals, my father's watch, my mother's wedding ring, and the majority of my estate shall pass to my daughter, Emily Carter. Someone gasped loudly. Dad's letter continued, without mercy. Diane will receive only those assets already legally assigned to her under our existing marital agreements. Nothing more. Diane suddenly stood. This is ridiculous, she shouted. He wouldn't do this. Mr. Harrison calmly raised one hand. The documents were properly witnessed, notarized, and legally executed. She looked around the room desperately. No one came to her defense. Not one person. Instead, my uncle slowly walked over to me. I'm sorry, Emily, he said quietly. I should never have believed those accusations. Aunt Linda hugged me next. So should I. One after another, relatives who had doubted me only an hour earlier apologized through tears. For the first time that day, I felt like I belonged again. Diane grabbed her purse with shaking hands. You'll all regret this, she muttered before storming toward the door. No one tried to stop her. The door closed behind her with a heavy thud. Then silence returned. Mr. Harrison carefully folded Dad's letter and handed it to me. It belongs to you now. I held the pages against my chest. At that moment, I realized my father had given me something far greater than an inheritance. He had protected my name. Even after death, he refused to let anyone rewrite the story of who I was. Walking out of that office, I wasn't thinking about the house, the money, or the estate. I was thinking about my father's final act of love. The greatest inheritance he left me wasn't measured in dollars. It was the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the only legacy powerful enough to silence a lifetime of lies forever.